doesn't matter if you're going out for your first internship or if you're looking for your 5th job. If you do these 10 things, you are going to absolutely destroy your next set of interviews. So it's been a little while since I made a video talking about interviewing, but I realized that with a lot of college students entering a recruiting season, especially in a pretty tough job market this year, that this was a great time to talk about all the little things you can do before your interviews to give yourself a leg up. All right, point number 1, establish what's on and off the table for the interview, whether that be the number of interviews, the duration of them, the languages you're going to use, or just the general types of questions that they're going to ask. In some cases, companies will do this by default and just send out an email to all the applicants. In other cases, though, you might have to ask the recruiter, and then other times you might not hear back, and you really won't know what's going on until the day of the interview. Regardless of the information that the recruiter gives you, though, you should really be ready for anything. I've had a couple cases myself where I was told one thing by the recruiter, there was some miscommunication between the recruiter and the people actually doing the interviewing, and I ended up having a different experience on the day of than the one I was expecting. Point number 2 is a super simple one that you can probably do in 15 minutes, but you'd be surprised how many people don't actually do it, which is to plan questions ahead of time about the company and the role. The reality is, depending on how your discussion is going with the interviewers, you might think of some of these types of questions on the fly, but it's always a good idea to think ahead of time about what sorts of things you're genuinely curious about, and also just things that are going to make it sound like you're really interested in the role and that you've actually done your research. Point number 3, this is probably the most obvious one on the entire list, but I have to say it anyway. Do your technical prep, but also be targeted about it. Different companies do things in different ways. The types of questions that are popular at company A are different from company B, which are different from company C. So if tomorrow your interview is with company A, you want to be specifically targeting the types of questions that you think they're most likely to ask you at company A. Naturally, you're not going to know what types of questions you're going to get asked until you actually go into the interview, but using a little bit of common sense and looking at the job description, you can probably start to get a bit of an idea of what sorts of things to focus on and what other things probably aren't going to get tested. Point number 4 is one that I never used in college, but is actually really important, which is interview simulation. Basically, the goal is to try and mimic the technical and the behavioral aspects of an interview, hopefully with a friend if you have someone who's willing to sit down with you. But one of the main things you want to focus on if you do this is to try to be as realistic as possible. This means focusing on things like your body language and the way you speak. So are you sitting up straight? Are you fidgeting too much with your hands? Are you speaking clearly and slowly? Are you easy to understand? And if you end up doing this, make sure you do it with a friend who's willing to be honest or record yourself, because a lot of the benefit from this comes from finding out all the things that you're doing wrong or that you could be doing better so that you can improve upon them for the actual interview. All right, moving on to point number 5, know your resume inside and out and be ready to use anything you have listed on it. This means you should be able to go into past classes, internships, jobs, personal projects, anything else that you have listed on that resume. You shouldn't need to be really giving yourself a refresher during the interview while they're asking you the questions, and you should be able to expand on all of the points that you have there and give more detail when they ask for it. And of course, the other aspect of this is that anything that's on your resume is fair game. So if there's stuff on there that you haven't really touched in a number of years, or maybe you never really touched it at all and you were just padding your resume, those things should not be on there, because if they ask you about those things when you're in the interview, it's not gonna be pretty. All right, point number 6. This is one that in my mind is really underrated and not enough people do, which is to focus on the common behavioral questions. And if you look online, there's lots of lists that talk about questions like this, things like what's your greatest strength or weakness, why do you want to work for this company? Basically, just focus on those key questions that frequently get asked in interviews and start crafting a story. And the reason why it's important to go through some of these common questions ahead of time is because you want your answers to be nice and refined, and you want to give off the appearance that you're an effective communicator. Now, if you're really a good communicator, maybe you can come up with these things on the spot, but you want to make sure you don't end up rambling. So basically, you don't want to start with a couple details from the beginning, and then jump to the end in the resolution, realize that you forgot some important context, then talk about some random details in the middle, and then by the end you've talked for 5 minutes, the interviewer is completely lost, and you haven't really won yourself any points. And that leads us into point number 7, which I probably could have included with the last section, but I thought it warranted its own talking point. Why do you want this job? And the reason why this gets its own point is because it's probably one of the most common behavioral questions that you'll hear in an interview, and it's also probably one of the more important ones, because you don't want it to sound like your answer is overly generic and like you said it to 10 other recruiters. You want to think of something that actually pertains to that specific company and why you actually want to work for them. I really want to drill this point home because as a freshman at a career fair, I just walked up to a random booth for a company I didn't know very much about. The recruiter asked me, "So why do you want to work for this company?" I did not have a good answer. You never want to be in that situation. All right, point number 8, make sure you do at least a little bit of research on the company ahead of time so you can better understand their values and their direction, or more specifically, the role you're going for and the tools and technologies that you're going to be using. To be clear, you definitely don't need to be an expert on the company. Yes, it looks good to show a little bit of initiative and to be able to speak to the things that the company believes in and what they're working on. But the other reason why this is important is going back to a prior point, just understanding what the company does and the culture there is going to better inform you of whether or not you actually want to work there. Doing your research online might reveal that there's terrible work-life balance or a bad culture, or on the flip side that it's an amazing place to work, and that's going to help inform your decision regardless of whether or not you get an offer, of whether or not you actually want to work there and if you would take the offer, assuming that you get one. Point number 9, this has to do with the day before and probably the morning of your interview, which is warm yourself up, but don't wear yourself out. Now, the key here is you don't want to overdo it. You want to feel sharp heading into those interviews, not mentally exhausted or having drained your confidence because you tried something that morning that was just too complicated, and now you're panicking because you don't feel like you can solve the problems. You want to make sure that your brain is in interview mode before you actually start the interview, so you're not sluggish or making simple mistakes right off the bat, because even if you ace the rest of the interview, that negative first impression could make the difference of you not getting the job. And finally, point number 10, keep your options open. Even if it's your dream company and you're feeling super confident, don't cancel your other interviews or stop applying to other places, because that only means there's going to be more stress on this one interview because you have more riding on it. If you keep interviewing with other places, you're more likely to get an expedited offer from that company because they want to lock you down before anyone else does. And it's also going to give you more leverage when it comes to negotiating. And on top of that, it's just going to keep giving you more practice, keeping you sharp, which means when the big moment comes for your actual dream company, you're more likely to knock it out of the park. All right, if you found any of those tips helpful, make sure you hit the thumbs up button. I really appreciate it, and subscribe if you haven't already. Anyways, that's it. Good luck with your interviews, and I will catch you guys in the next one.